did you sleep last night? And did you go to bed and wake up around the same time you did the night before? Because here's what shocked me this week. Irregular sleepers have around a 50% higher all-cause mortality risk than people with regular sleep. Not people who sleep less, people who sleep at different times. Today I'm talking to Dr. Jemma King, behavioural scientist, stress, sleep and recovery researcher, and author of the new book, Sleep First, Sleep Smarter, Think Sharper, Feel Better. Jemma has spent her career working with Olympians, Special Forces soldiers, and burnt-out executives. And she keeps landing on the same answer. Sleep isn't one wellness thing amongst many. It's the lever everything else depends on. In today's episode of Wellness Simplified, we get into what's actually happening in each stage of sleep and why they're important, and how to optimize each stage, why consistency beats duration, how to tame an overactive mind at night, and one unique strategy you can use to solve problems in your sleep. And of course, by the end, the one thing that you can do this week to start optimizing your sleep. I hope you enjoy the show. Let's get into it. Hey, Jemma, thank you so much for joining us on Wellness Simplified. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
I've been wanting to do an episode specifically on sleep for a while, but I like focusing on Australian experts. And obviously there's a number of great books out there, but they're all from overseas experts. And then you came across my LinkedIn feed with your book. I was like, oh, perfect. Excellent.
So, very serendipitous.
Indeed. Good timing. Now, before we jump into sleep, I like to just let people into the lives of the guests. So I'd love to hear, how do you start your day? Do you have a set morning routine? How do you set yourself up for success?
Well, I travel a lot, so it's pretty chaotic. And unfortunately, I don't have a really good routine. But if I am home, I typically get up really early. My partner's an early bird. I'm not. I've changed into becoming an early bird, but naturally I'm a night owl. So I'm up 6:30 and try and do some form of exercise. I always know that in the morning I'm a little useless cognitively, and so I like to push back all my sort of deep thinking till the afternoon, which is kind of unusual. People think at 3 o'clock, they're like, oh, I can't think, but that's my best time, 3, 5, and on, and later in the evening. So one thing I don't do, or I try not to do, is grab my phone first thing in the morning, because it'll set my cortisol off. You don't have no control over who's texted you, what you're going to see, who's blowing up who, what's happening in the media, what terrible catastrophes happen. So I really try and protect that, first half an hour. Yeah. Then I have coffee, and it's usually probably my last coffee of the day, because I'm quite sensitive to it. I try to have a good protein breakfast. I find that having protein as opposed to simple carbohydrates really sort of sets my blood glucose for the day, and I don't get these sort of fluctuations, which we know are very correlated to emotional fluctuations. Okay. And so then I get into social media. I catch up on what's happening while I'm having coffee, and then start the day.
Nice, awesome. And I agree with you in terms of that, half an hour, not just jumping straight into it, giving yourself that buffer time, because especially as women, if our cortisol spikes too quickly, then the whole day can be off.
Yeah, you get really dysregulated. And I think that also emotionally, you've just got to protect how you prime your day, because when you start the day off with catastrophe, it just really sets a lens for which you see the world. So I try to look out on green. When I'm at my farm, it's we have so many beautiful birds, and it's just really, really beautiful and quiet. So I try and sort of absorb that, because usually I'm on a plane or in a city with lots of noise and chaos.
Interesting. How do you, just quickly, a follow-up question to that, what are some of your habits to living a life like that, and still, because you're all about optimal performance and so forth, moving so much, do you have any little hacks that you've gained along the way?
I just try not to attend to, I kind of gaslight myself, to be honest. So if I'm tired, if I'm jet lagged, I think, I actually feel pretty good. I actually considering I don't look for evidence that I'm tired and I should be feeling sad and overwhelmed. I look for evidence that I'm actually coping quite well. And I say to myself, you know what, you used to go out till all hours of the morning and not sleep for fun.
Yes.
And I always do, retrospectively, I look back and I go, you've gotten through this before,
Yeah.
and you can do it again. So,
Yes.
but if I ever do feel, I feel emotionally quite stable. So, but if I ever start to feel like, overwhelmed, I've got some pretty good protocols on what to do. Of course, it's exercise, sleep, eating really well, getting off sugar, no alcohol, ring my mum, talk to my kids.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I've got a pretty good formula.
Nice. And there's one thing that you said there that I really loved. You said, I look for evidence like that things are doing well. And I think that's so key, like from a psychological perspective, is it's all about where we're looking for evidence, right?
Yeah, I think people don't understand that thoughts aren't just these ephemeral constructs that just go off into the ether and mean nothing. Thoughts create chemicals, and these chemicals have biological and psychological consequences that you've got to be really aware of. So I think you've got to be really disciplined about what you let run around in your head. You think, oh, it's inside my skull. No one will know. It will have no effect. It's just me and my private thoughts. But it's not true. When you produce cortisol, it emanates out of your skin. There's chemo signaling. People can pick up your emotions. As I said before, it colors the lens with which you see the world. You look for, if you're looking for evidence of negativity in yourself, that looks, it translates into how you see negativity in the world. You become reactive, you become closed. So I think you've got to be really, really careful about, the contents and the quality of your thoughts.
Yeah, I agree so much. I mean, just as much we spend so much time thinking about well, I don't know if we, but lots
Yeah.
of people about how much we're eating or what we're putting into us and not what we're actually consuming mentally. So, yeah, I think that's key. I love that. But your background is actually in stress and performance psychology, and you've worked with all kinds of people, Olympic forces, C-suite, then the armed forces, like quite impressive. But so what led you to focus on this deep dive into sleep for your book?
Yeah, it was kind of accidental. As I said, I'm a night owl. I hated sleep. I thought it was really boring. I wouldn't do it. So, like I say in my book, when people read that I'm researching and writing about stress, people would be like, from my youth, go, "What? Her?" She was like, I was a terrible sleeper, but I started studying cortisol and stress, and doing big studies with thousands of people, and I started to see something in the data that I could not ignore, and that was the fact that every single person who I came across who had a mental health disruption had a sleep disruption. They didn't sleep well or normally. And then every single person who I saw that didn't sleep normally would eventually succumb to some form of mental health disruption. And I thought there's a really strong correlation here that I can't ignore. And so I started looking more and more into sleep. And, when you look working with athletes and special forces soldiers and people who don't have a lot of time, or, people who don't have resources, like Australian athletes aren't very well resourced. Or if you're away and on deployment and you don't have access to a lot of resources, I was thinking, what is the greatest, most accessible, free, democratically available, effective performance enhancing protocol? And it came down to sleep. Like, if you really want to become faster, smarter, better, quicker, stronger, more emotionally stable, just have better cognitive performance, sleep is 100% the place where you should start. And it's so easy. Like, it's right there every night for free. And, I know there's a lot of people who have sleep issues, but I really found that if you just got that right, the second and third order effect of that was that everything else fell into place or became much easier to wrangle or to change. Like, behavioural change became a lot easier. When you weren't tired, you felt like eating better. You feel like going to the gym. You feel like being nice to people. And
Yeah.
so It's really hard to do all those other things when you're tired.
Yeah, no, totally. And so with it, all of my interviews, I always end them with like, what's the one habit? And so far, pretty much everybody has come back to reduce stress and optimize your sleep. Like it's so
Yeah, it's so boring.
sometimes we,
I think
yeah,
our
we
grandparents
overlook
be
the
going,
simple, right? We want the fancy and like the complicated protocol, but it's often the really simple things that make the biggest difference.
yeah, you think about all these people just spending thousands on longevity hacks, their wellness bros and supplements this and
Yeah.
device this and that. And like, seriously, just, do what your grandparents said. It's like, have a good night's
They live on the
sleep.
farm where there's no lights at night, you know? Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
I liked in your book, you really went deep into the different kind of stages of sleep. And if
Hmm.
people don't have some kind of tracker, they're probably not aware of that. And even if they are, they might not really understand what's happening at each stage. So could you explain that to us?
Yeah. So I know that some people really don't like trackers and they think that it's maybe a waste of money. But honestly, if you have a serious mental, physical health issue or feel like you're not coping with life, I strongly recommend just getting a wearable, even for 6 months. Because if you don't know what's going on during that really imperative part of your day, sleep architecture, you just don't know. You don't know how to change it, or even if you should change it. And so when you think about the sleep cycles, all of them are equally as important and they do different things. So you start off with light sleep. So that's that really nice, when you're drifting in between consciousness and awareness, where alpha brain waves they start to change. And, you can have insights at this time, which is quite lovely. And I think a lot of people historically have used this time for, creative insights. That's the part that also, if you suffer from anxiety, you see a lot of that, light sleep in people's data. And then you go down to, because this is non-REM sleep, then you go down N1, N2. During this N2 stage, you see things like K complexes and sleep spindles, which we are now learning are really important in terms of learning about sort of skill development. So if you're learning to ride a bike or if you're learning to play an instrument, you see a lot of these spindles and K complexes. And these are also what I call is the brain's body like bouncer. So if you're falling asleep and you hear a car door slam or a dog bark, you get this spike of brain waves. And it's basically a bouncer just checking, should I wake you up or are you okay to go to sleep? And if you're okay to go to sleep, these brain waves will sort of protect you from waking up, so you can get down into deep slow wave sleep, which is N3, which is I say it's the body's wellness retreat.
Yeah,
I
totally.
think it's an incredibly important part of your sleep architecture. It's when all of your brain cleaning, majority of your brain cleaning happens. It's when 70 to 80% of your human growth hormone gets produced. So human growth hormone, people think, oh, is that just the stuff that, kids need to grow their legs long? But adults need it. And it's, it's imperative for so many different metabolic processes. And there's a window of opportunity in that deep slow wave sleep, primarily in the first 2 hours before midnight, that is super important for repair and replenishment and bone, blood, brain, repairing. Then you come up into REM sleep, which is the rapid eye movement. But this is also when, you make sense of the emotional activities of the day, any unfinished business gets thought about then. It also has a very big forgetting component. So there's a lot of stuff that happens throughout your day you do not need to remember. And this is, I like to say, this is the time when your midnight librarian does his or her work. So like imagine if you've got a bench and all these folders come in and it's all the day's happenings and the librarian goes, oh, put that one in that box, put that one over there, that I can chuck that one out.
Nice.
And then sometimes sometimes the librarian says, oh my God, I don't know what this memory is. It's pretty contentious. I need to wake up the boss and get some
Oh,
executive instructions for this. And that's why a lot of people will get that 2 or 3 a.m. waking at the
really?
same time
That's
of
so
night.
interesting.
I think it's like your midnight librarian saying, yeah, I need some help with this. And then you wake up and you go, oh, and you get really stressed about that thing and you produce cortisol, because cortisol has a 30-minute half-life. And then, if you don't wrangle that thought, or, you don't have a good protocol, that's when your 90-second wake up can turn into 90 minutes of horror.
Yeah, yeah.
And then but this is a 90-minute sleep cycle. You pop out. Usually we just have a micro awakening at that time and we go back down into the next sleep cycle. But some people just pop out at that end of that sleep cycle and then just can't get back to sleep.
Yeah.
And we see a lot of sleep disruption. So that's basically the sleep architecture.
And do you have recommendations for like ideal, so for people who are tracking, for like the ideal kind of percentage they should, or numbers they should be aiming for in each of those?
Yeah, so your 50% of your sleep architecture should get made up with deep slow wave sleep and REM sleep. So depending on what you did that day, so if you had a very metabolically demanding day, if you've been sick, if you've been doing a lot of physical activity, you see slightly larger percentage of deep slow wave sleep, maybe like 26%. And then if you've had and less REM sleep, but if you've had a very intellectually demanding, emotionally demanding day, if you've had MSG, monosodium glutamate, what we see is an increase in the REM sleep and a slight decrease in deep slow wave sleep. So that should be, around about your sleep cycles of REM and deep slow wave sleep. And hopefully you get about 2 hours or more of this,
Yeah.
at least. Some people get up to 4, which is amazing.
Mm. And is there any, like, if people were looking and maybe perhaps, and I've seen this sometimes on my tracker, like if you're going well as far as deep sleep is concerned, but like a lower percentage on REM or vice versa, is there any specific recommendations, like if deep sleep or REM sleep are particularly low, but the
Yeah.
overall, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's a lot of things that can disrupt these parts of the sleep cycle. And, as you said, tracking is incredibly important. So then you can go and sort of decipher which is getting affected by your behaviors and which isn't, and which we need to work on. So I think if you're getting not enough deep slow wave sleep, really could be alcohol. So maybe it could be you're eating heavy protein before bed. So your body will prioritize getting rid of, decomposing meat in your stomach rather than getting
Sounds
to
great when
deep
you say
slow
it
wave
like
sleep.
that, right?
No, that's really what it is. So,
Yeah.
so your body will push back the deep slow wave sleep and digest food. So if you're seeing that, and you get the meat sweat, some people get that where they just have so much, heavy protein in their system. So if you're doing that, I would really recommend having your protein for lunch and then vegetarian for night. Also, what could be pushing back your deep slow wave sleep is that you've exercised too much. So if you've done any exercise in the 4 hours before sleep, that is 50% above your maximum perceived output, that will increase your cortisol, it'll increase your core body temperature, and it'll make your sleep onset be delayed. So if that's you, I would really be exercising during the day or just doing gentle exercise before bed. Another thing is if you're having alcohol, it absolutely crushes REM sleep. We know that because your body will want to get rid of the alcohol byproducts, which are toxic, before you go into REM sleep. As I said, MSG will give you an extended REM sleep, but you actually wake up feeling very, very sort of brain fried and thirsty. Have you ever had that experience where
I hate
felt
MSG.
like
I
you've
can't
been,
handle it, so I avoid it.
yeah, so you feel like you've been thinking all night and you
Yeah.
wake up and even though you've had a lot of REM, you don't feel refreshed at all.
Mm.
So yeah, so a really big thing is, getting to sleep in those 2 hours before midnight.
Mm.
Like if people say, oh, I sleep 8 hours, but I go to bed at 12 or 1, but I sleep in. Well, the big population data sets are saying that actually it's not good for you. Like 8 hours sleep is not equal. It's when you have it. So bringing your sleep cycle forward is incredibly important for getting a lot of that deep and REM sleep.
It's so interesting. Like a lot of this stuff, we've known about for centuries. Like I remember my meditation teacher when I was 20 telling me at some meditation retreat that the ancients had always said that the hours before midnight were the critical. And so it's this information that we've had, but we kind of overlook.
I know, because we live in this attention economy where there's so many things vying for our attention that are,
Mm,
and people from streamers and social media hire behavioral scientists like me to work out how do we capture them, and they openly say that sleep is their biggest competitor.
mm,
So, and we, it's really unfortunate because the dopamine hacked us, and we've all turned into like these dopamine crackheads, and it's really really hard for us to stop
mm.
getting pulled into these algorithms that know us so well. They know how to hack our dopamine, oxytocin, our adrenaline, our cortisol, and we're up against a huge multi billion trillion dollar machine, particularly kids. I say to parents, if there's one thing you can do to be a good parent to show that you love your child and that you care about your child's future, is make sure they don't have phones in their room. Just one thing. Just if you do anything, just do that,
Yeah,
because they can't help themselves.
yeah,
And it is absolutely critical that they get deep, replenishing sleep. And what we're seeing is a huge, big correlation between, sleep deprivation and anxiety and depression. And I actually think that a lot of this epidemic of mental health is probably sleep deprivation.
yeah. And just overstimulation as well, I imagine. Yeah. Totally. There's one thing in that section I loved. You talked about directing your subconscious problem solver. Can you talk us through that dream incubation process? It's really cool. And if you have any examples of how you've used it.
Well, I think you just sort of set an intention before you go to sleep, like you've got some kind of problem set that you want to, I suppose, explore. And what we know that when you're conscious, you've got all these rules. You've got rules of physics, rules of societal rules, rules that you've given yourself, belief systems. And what we see is when you go into this sleep, into either when you're falling asleep or just when you're waking up from sleep, you see that these societal, behavioral, physiological constraints kind of get lifted, and then your mind can wander freely without those constraints. And so, if you really deliberately try and tap into this, you can have some incredible insights and brain connectivity between constructs or subsets of your memory that necessarily don't normally talk to each other. So, you can write it down on a piece of paper, sort of set an intention, and then depending what you want to do, you can hold a spoon in your hand or a set of keys and have a metal tray underneath your chair or next to your bed and sort of sit there and sort of drift off into, alpha brain waves, into light sleep. And then when you fall asleep, your hand will relax and you'll drop the keys or something metal and it'll clink. And then when you wake up, you try to just sit with the essence of the feeling. It's not necessarily won't be make sense or won't be logical, but just try to get the essence of what you've felt or smelt or seen, or could be a somatic feeling, and quickly jot it down, even if it doesn't make sense to you.
Yeah.
And also you can do this when you're just waking up.
Yeah, that's cool. I like that. Um, there's another thing in your book that really, actually, it stopped me quite a bit. It says that it was a study that you were quoting, that irregular sleepers have around a 50% higher all-cause mortality risk than people with regular sleep. I was like, whoa. And you actually talk
Mm.
about how your duration matters, yes, obviously, but consistency matters more. Can you explain that?
Yeah, this was quite confronting, I think, for a lot of people. And you think, I've just got to get, as I was saying before, I've just got to get, at least, 7.5, 8 hours in. But yeah, this huge, big population data set was saying, actually, no. And when you really look at the biology of, sleep and what's, happening inside our cells, it makes sense, because inside every single cell in your body, there's a tiny clock. And, not really, but there is, timekeepers, and they need to know whether they up or down regulate, whether they clean, whether they repair, whether they grow, whether they build. or remain dormant. And this is all controlled by our internal timekeeper. So just imagine if you got a chopstick and rammed it into the top of your mouth, and you hit up here, you would hit something called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is SCN, which is a little tiny, like the grain of a rice, piece of brain cells. And this is our internal timekeeper. And it's very much driven by light and day, like sunlight. And so it will send a message to all the different systems in your body. It's time to upregulate or downregulate. It's time to grow. It's time to expel, metabolic byproducts. And these are very systematic, and they need to know when that's happening. So if you're throwing yourself into bed at different times, getting up at different times, delaying your sleep at different times, your body gets really confused. And you think about from a hunter-gatherer perspective, like humans didn't have phones and Netflix and all these, everything at their fingertips. They would just go to sleep. They were often quite tired, from physically tired. They were often a little bit hungry. And so they would get straight into sleep. And so for our hunter-gatherers, which, we're still tracking with this same hardware and software, being up at night with the moonlight hitting the bottom of your retinal cells would be meaning there's something bad going on. There's something significant going on. And so that would mean your body would produce stress hormones to ramp up just in case something was going to happen. And so if you're doing this to your body every day, your body's getting really confused, going, why am I up? There must be something stressful. And so then when you produce stress hormones, cortisol takes, 30 minutes, got a 30-minute half-life to get out of your system. And then you're lying there going, go to bed. And then your body's like got stress hormones in it. And then half an hour later, you're still not asleep. And then you get more stressed. This is a really kind of like catastrophic downward spiral to be in. And so what you've got to do, you've got to tell your cells, now I'm going to go to sleep. Now you can downregulate. Now you can relax. Don't produce any stress hormones. Produce sleepy hormones or not. And I like to use the analogy of a cafe. So, if you're running a cafe with a whole lot of waitresses and waiters and you say, okay, we're going to open on Tuesday. And then your staff say, okay, what time should we come into work and how long's our shift? And you say, I don't know, I'll just let you know when I open the doors. Like, it would be untenable for any staff members. But we're doing this to ourselves every day. And so your cells aren't doing the jobs they're supposed to be doing because they're trying to work out what the heck is going on. And stress hormones are expensive.
Yeah, absolutely. And what about, this whole idea of social jet lag? Can you explain that? And then, let's start with explaining that.
Yeah, so social jet lag is the time between when you need to go to sleep and when you actually go to sleep. And so the difference between, say, your weekday sleep times versus your weekend sleep times. So if you're going to bed sort of regularly most weeknights and then you have blowouts on the weekend and you're up till 2 a.m., what you're like, exactly what I was talking about before, your brain needs this consistency. So it's pretty much like you are flying, 3 or 4 different time zones, but aren't actually going anywhere. You're not actually having the holiday, but your body's feeling like you're actually having a time zone change. And as we know, if anyone's ever had jet lag, it can last for days and you just feel completely whacked out because there's so many systems in your body that really rely on that night, day, wake, sleep signal. So in the book, I've got a formula actually. So if you work out, your week time, bedtimes and wake ups versus your weekends, and if it's a big number, you should really reassess your friends.
Sounds like, people shouldn't be like, it sounds like you and I used to be in too much hardcore party animals.
Yeah. Yes.
But from that perspective, just getting practical for a moment, do you then recommend that people maybe are not such heroes during the week and getting up so early, so they're actually more consistent? What's the level of difference between when you go to sleep and wake up during the week and wake up at the night that doesn't affect your body? Like, how much leeway do you have?
Well, It really is an individual number. And I think you've got to do mini experiments on yourself. You're better off getting regular sleep than lots of sleep. If you have to go between, okay, I know I've got a busy time, or I know I've got lot on in the weekend, you're much better off having consistent wake sleep times rather than being all over the place. So if you know that you're going to, be up really late on weekends, you're probably better off picking a later bedtime, but having a consistent bedtime.
Yeah.
I know, but like, there's only so long that your body can keep up with this. And as I say in the book, Mother Nature's like the mafia; she comes and collects no matter what. Like, you
Yeah.
can't get away with this. You might think it. Oh, I can't lose weight, or I'm having trouble, concentrating at work, or I'm starting to get, colds all the time, and you think, oh, must be something else. But you can probably, follow it back to the fact that you are having inconsistent and insufficient deep slow wave sleep.
Yeah. No, I imagine listening to this will definitely be a wake up call for some people because, they're like, I'm getting my 8 hours, but it's all over the shop different days. So that's really interesting that you say that it's the consistency is actually more important.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go into a few more. Like you've got so much in the book about how to optimize sleep. We'll just go into a couple of things. Could you just talk briefly about how you set up your environment for sleep, optimal sleep?
Yeah, I think if you think from like a hunter-gatherer perspective, it was very dangerous for us to be, knocked out for, 7.5 hours, 8 hours, where there was predators and, we're unprotected. So for us to get into a headspace where we easily and happily fall into deep sleep, we need to feel safe, secure, the temperature's got to be right. We need to make sure that we've got sufficient time to do it. There's not pressing issues in our mind. And so there's a constellation of psychological, physical, and behavioural things that we should consider when we are looking at good, consistent, solid, deep sleep. And so in the lead up to sleep, you really should be, having at least a 2 hour block out time for anything stimulating, anything that's going to put lux light into your eyeballs. So try to not have, TVs going right up until before you go to bed, or doom scrolling. I know it's really hard, but if you can, turn your screen down to the darkest lux that you can. If you do have to look at your phone, I do this. I look at my phone on the side if I have to like check the time, or I have to look at my phone during night, so I don't put the light straight into my eyeballs. I always will turn down all the lights in my house and make them low, head level orange lights. I've gone and got a whole lot of motion activated strip lights that I put underneath my sink in my bathroom and in hallways, just so when I'm walking around, I'm not getting these bright lights into my eyeballs. I've got a red light in my bedroom. So when I walk into my bedroom, I don't turn on the overhead light. I turn on this red light. And so it's got this really nice sort of emanating, feel to it. And it does not hit your circadian rhythm in the wrong direction like other lights. I'm sure my neighbours think I'm running a side hustle because there's this red. So I try not to eat before bed. I don't have anything sugary. We know from Whoop data that people who eat sugary snacks sleep on average about 26 minutes less than people who don't eat sugary snacks. So if I do have anything before bed, I might have a handful of walnuts or some, tea, like non-caffeinated tea, or a piece of cheese, something like that, something that's got tryptophan in it, which is, tryptophan is the precursor to melatonin. I make sure I only sleep with natural fiber pajamas, and my sheets are like 100% cotton. So I've got silk or cotton pajamas because any type of synthetic, nylon can really trap heat and make you feel quite irritated. I don't use perfume, what are they called? Fabric softeners or anything like that on my sheets. Because I live on a farm as well and I'm off grid, I've got to have all the special like non-chemical washing powders, but that can be very irritating for people. I've got an 8 sleep, which is one of the best inventions ever. It's
Yeah,
that
really
mattress
great.
that, yeah, honestly, if anyone's perimenopausal or has really bad doona fights with their partner, has fluctuations of their temperature, I think that's one of the really good pieces of sleep tech. I love that.
Mm.
Uh, but I try to down regulate. I don't, would never like try and have an argument or think about anything stressful before bed. If I really feel agitated, I'll name to tame, brain dump, just write down everything. And I set a worry hour for the next day. So I'll say at 11 o'clock, I'm going to think about this. I'm going to, call the accountant. I'm going to do this, all the things that are worrying me.
Wait a second,
I
I love what you just said. That's so cool. I really, really like that because I do think, and my partner is like this, that, he's got such a crazy brain. It's a compliment, like very smart, but like like he finds it hard to sleep because his brain just won't switch off and he'll wake up in the middle of the night thinking of something.
mhm.
So I love that idea of like a brain dump and then actually scheduling, yeah, the worry hour. It's almost like, do you know the in Dumbledore, where there's this thing where he empties all of his thoughts into a sieve, and the sieve keeps his thoughts, and then he can just pull them. I love that image. I'm like, I want to invent something like that.
Yes, well, yeah, you can do it. So, I mean, this is, helping your midnight librarian out is just basically closing the loop of all the unfinished threads in your head,
Yeah.
and that should wake you up and say, you've got to think about this. So I think getting a nice heavy bound book with, heavy paper and a nice pen,
Mm.
and then categorizing it. So, putting it into folders on your page for your librarian. And then another thing that's really important, if you're going to have a worry hour, have it around, at least when your cortisol's high. So at least 40 minutes post waking, not too close to bed to the next day. But you just say, okay, in this hour, I'm going to do this. And it's really important to put down the time that you're going to do it.
Mm.
So 11:15, I'm going to make this call. So that placates the midnight librarian saying, you're actually serious about dealing with this tomorrow. It's not going to be your job at 3 a.m. to sort this out.
Yeah,
So just having that added, categorization and time is really important. Or, who are you going to call? Like just making it sound like you're really serious about taking over the responsibility of this thought is important.
yeah, no, that's great.
And
Uh,
then also, if I can't go to sleep, because I've got an incredibly busy mind, I engage in cognitive shuffling.
oh, tell
This
me about
really
that.
works for
Yeah.
me. So basically, you think of a word like slumber, and you think
Mm.
of all the non-related words starting with S that you can picture in your mind. So shoes, salt, silver, situations, slither, and then you sort of like picture it. And then when you can't think of any more S words, you go on to L, then U. And I've literally never gotten to R. And I'm someone who has a lot of trouble going to sleep. So that's a really, really effective protocol.
Wow, I've never heard of that. And so what's just very quickly, the science behind that? It's just because your mind's literally like, wouldn't your mind then be focusing on trying to think of the next word, or it's not engaging enough that it keeps you like, what's
Yeah,
the
that is,
science?
yeah. So it's got to be engaging enough so you don't play mental ping pong, but not too emotionally evoking.
Mm.
And so because it's like non-related words, you can't get a thread which then you can attach an emotion to. It's and it's you can make it visual in your mind, you can imagine them. So what happens is that your brain will, and I think I've got this theory called the resource over allocation theory, or the brain rot theory, is that, as I said before, our hunter gatherer ancestors really would go to bed quite hungry.
Yeah.
And so now that we're going to bed full of resources, high blood sugar, our brain does what it does best, is it uses whatever resources it has
Mm.
to think of all the bad things that can happen to us and all the things we should be worried about. And
Yeah.
often when we're still and we're quiet, before bed, the rest of the day we never do this. When our hunter-gatherer ancestors would have spent time in contemplation, they would have spent time just quiet thinking, just not doing anything. We never give ourselves that opportunity during the day. So when we get to bed, this is our brain's time to go roaring at us, going, all these things you should be thinking of. And because our brain's got these extra resources, this extra glucose, it'll use it, and it'll use it until it depletes it. And so that's why people get super anxious before bed. So
Mm.
if you go to bed just a little bit hungry, and whatever resources your brain does put it to task on something that's sort of efficient enough to, keep you from thinking about worried thing, but not too emotionally evoking. That I found that's the best combination.
Nice. I like that. That's really fun. And food timing, you just mentioned about not going to bed too full. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so actually a PhD student of mine did her PhD in time restricted eating, and she found she works for Whoop and head of global performance, and she found that those people who ate their last meal when the sun went down, all of their metrics improved. So their resting heart rate, their heart rate variability, their respiration rate, sleep duration, quality, amount of disturbances, all these metrics improved. And in fact, I think she said 3 p.m. was the best time, but like, who's going to do that? No one.
Maybe if
So
you're Brian Johnson, but apart from
yeah, I
that,
mean, I'm all about the middle road. Like, I
yeah,
think
yeah,
it's, having a good meal, laughing with your family, and having occasional wine. I think it's very, very good for you. And in fact, loneliness is very dangerous for you. In
totally.
fact, loneliness really affects your sleep. So yeah, the good thing about restricting your eating is, as I said, your bodies can say this is time now to repair. It's not time to digest and deal with all of the things that you put into your body. And what you eat is really important. There's a lot of research that shows that a Mediterranean diet is the best for sleep because it's low, it's low sugar, it's natural, it's got lots of prebiotics. So prebiotics are the things that your gut bugs love to eat, and it makes a short chain fatty acid called butyrate, which is incredibly important for sleep. It really helps the lining of your stomach. It helps that, inside our stomach, we've got tight junctions in between our cells,
Yeah.
and it's got a layer of mucus over the top. And the butyrate is something that helps this mucus layer. And then when you don't have that, say if you drink alcohol or you've got a bad gut biome, what you get is like the tight junctions come apart and food particles can get into your bloodstream, and it sets off an immune response. An immune response is terrible for sleep. You get cytokines, you get increased, you get increased blood pressure, you get increased temperature. So all these things are probably not good for, or we know that are not good for sleep. So if you're eating a Mediterranean diet, 4 to 6 hours before sleep, all of your system, your gut biome, your blood glucose is all in the optimal stage. And you've got all the precursors you need for the sleep hormones as well.
Yeah. With that study that you mentioned, I mean, I imagine I can see totally how that would work now in winter, but in Australian summer, that could be quite hard, right? Because the sun doesn't go down till like sometimes 8 o'clock or something.
Yeah, so I would really strongly recommend big blackout curtains, and if you can't do that, eye mask.
Yeah, yeah,
And I think within reason, like we know that if you have got swings, 1 to 2 hours. I mean, there are evidence to show that when we have the changing of the clocks of what's it called? I've forgotten, mental blank. When we change it from daylight saving,
right, yeah.
that's right. Yeah. We see that there are more strokes, more heart attacks, and more people die. But if you're a healthy person, I think this swing from 1 to 2 hours you can cope with,
Yeah,
as long as everything else is in order. So I see mental health and physical health as levers. So sleep's being the number one, the biggest lever.
yeah,
But then there's exercise, there's food, there's social connectedness, there's stress with work. So if you know that these other levers are not going to be on green, then you make sure that your sleep is 100% on green. But if you say you're got daylight savings and you can't go to bed, then make sure that you are exercising. Then make sure that you are eating well. Make sure that if you are staying up, it's something healthy. It's not like binging on social media that's
yeah,
awful.
yeah,
So just see it as a formula, and that sometimes you're not going to have them all on green, but be aware of like the combined consequence of having all these aspects of your life on red.
yeah. And just finally, in terms of what's optimal to do, you mentioned you go through a couple of supplements in the book, and also some really interesting thing about timing with melatonin. Could you talk us just briefly touch on that?
Yeah, I think people get really confused about what melatonin is. I think it's like a sleep sedative, like a sleeping tablet, and you think, I'm going to take a melatonin and I'm going to fall asleep. It's not. It's a signaler. It's just basically signals to your brain that now it's time to go to sleep. So you can take melatonin at the wrong time; it will have zero effect, or just make you feel terrible tomorrow. And I'm very dubious. I think I talk about in the book about how much people are taking melatonin, relying on it, especially with children. Like, I don't think unless you've been prescribed by a doctor, you should not be giving your kids melatonin gummies, particularly ones off the internet. So we've found that those from the internet can have either no melatonin in it or sometimes up to 400 times the melatonin. And we've seen a huge increase in the number of children and toddlers who are getting admitted to emergency room hospitals because they're getting poisoned by it. And there are so many systems in our body that melatonin, works on, and we don't know all of what it does. Sleep signaling is just one of the things. So if you are going to have melatonin, what it does, it can help you bring forward your sleep cycle. So if you are like a really late night person and you know that you've got to change your sleep cycle, you can take melatonin, say 8 o'clock, and it'll start to signal you to get sleepier earlier. But you can't just take one at, say in the morning or very late at night and go, this is going to knock me out and put me to sleep. It does not work like that.
Yeah. Awesome. You've touched on this a little, but we started with your morning routine, and I'd love to now go like, what is your nighttime routine? And in addition to that, is there something a new habit that you've taken on reading while you've been writing this book that surprised you by how beneficial it's been?
So I think, the light has been really important for me. So when I was researching this book, I found that there was a strong correlation between how much daytime light you got and how susceptible you are to evening light. So I talk about don't sleep with Alan. So Alan is artificial light at night.
Yeah.
And so what we see, if you do have exposure to Alan or artificial light at night, how much daytime light will actually be protective. So there was an experiment, and they looked at office workers, those that sort of got light in the morning and those that didn't, and then they looked at how much their melatonin was pushed back of an evening, predicated on how much light they got during the day in the office and then how much artificial light at night. And they found that those who got some good daylight sunlight, morning light, they were less susceptible. And it was also like the color of your eyes and how old you are. So if you're blue-eyed and younger, you're much more susceptible. If you've got dark eyes and you're older, you're less susceptible. So I think that now because I've got really fair skin, so I've been really sort of avoidant of the sun, and I was like a vampire, I'm going to melt. But now I'm very much, I do try and take off my sunglasses and get a lot more sun into my eyeballs, where I would always wear sunglasses no matter what.
Yeah.
And so I'm really, really careful about, the whole turning down the lights at night, turning down my screens, and being very aware of what I put into my eyeballs in the evening. I've also, alcohol too. Like, I love a glass of red wine, but I'm so aware of how bad it is for my sleep. And so I've really cut back. I still occasionally have red wine, or, special occasions, we'll drink cocktails and stay up late. But I just know that if I'm going to have a really important week or a big day or something going on where I've got to do a workshop for 4 hours, I'm really careful about alcohol. And also the food. I'm trying not to have heavy protein at night, and I'm trying to have vegetarian for dinner. I'm really, really strict around MSG as well. It just kills me.
Yeah.
So that I just think, combination of light food and light exposure.
And because I read you have kids as well, and
Yeah.
busy work and so forth. And what's your timing as far as, I think that's the tricky thing when you've got a family, to try to eat too early, because you've got to I don't know about you, but get the kids home, take them to activities, get food, So how do you manage that?
Well, luckily, not luckily, but my kids they're big kids. They've grown up and moved out. But incredibly hard to manage the kids. meal prepping was a huge thing for me because I was a single mum for a lot of it, and I was studying and working and had
Oh,
three
yeah.
kids, and they all had to be in different spots and in different places. So I would have no junk food. Like, so when the kids would get home and they would just, typically they'd snack on all this junk food,
Mm.
and then they wouldn't get hungry until later, and then dinner was a fight. I just was like, okay, no, they can eat what's in their lunch boxes when they come home, and then I would try and have dinner quite early. And because I was doing my PhD, I had to get them to bed so I could get on, on my computer and finish doing my work later at night. So yeah, I would do a lot of meal prepping on a Sunday, and I love cooking. So I would just have some, easy basics, and then I'd put a heap of green stuff on top.
Yeah, yeah, nice, awesome. And I love bringing it all together now. I love you to talk about experiments. I'm a big fan. I mean, we do it in my business about running like little mini health experiments. So I love your
Yeah.
approach to that. So what would be an experiment that the listeners could try this week if they have some kind of a wearable, or even just tracking how they feel?
Yeah, I think like if you've got a wearable like the Whoop, you can do little mini experiments inside the app, and you get sent, monthly reports. So, just pick one thing that you're going to do. If it is it, maybe changing your diet or changing the time or the type of exercise. Um, so I think, or if you don't have a wearable, you can do it. And I've got in the book how to do it. So pick something that's not sleep related. So how, do you want to lose weight? Do you want to increase your cognitive performance? And you can maybe get online or get on an app and get a reaction time app on your phone. Look, they're free. And then, so what you do is you baseline yourself. So you get a scale of 1 to 10 on whatever dimension you're looking at, whether it's your mood, whether it's your motivation level, your energy levels, your amount of times that you argue with people, how much weight you've got, or how many snack foods that you crave during the day, or even how much you vape, for instance, and actually have like 1 to 10 and baseline yourself for a week where you do no behavioral intervention. You just sort of track where you're at, and then you go, okay, I'm going to go to bed and do nothing apart from this, but I'm going to be in bed asleep by 10
Yeah,
every night for 2 weeks, including weekends.
yeah,
And then after these 2 weeks, then track it again and see where you're at.
yeah, nice. I love
And
that.
it's free, and it's 2 weeks of your life. And I guarantee that you will see some movement in whatever you're
Love it.
tracking.
Love it. You mentioned the cognitive, like reaction time. That's a cool idea. Looking at like doing an app before and after. That's great.
Yeah, psychomotor vigilance tests they're called. They often use them on mine sites or aeroplanes, whatever. But it's basically because your speed of processing, your reaction time is a good indicator of how your brain functioning is going. And so this is something very tangible and easy that you can try and get better at. And we know that if you do sleep, your reaction times will increase. But if you're tired, that's one of the first things that goes.
That's awesome. I am totally going to try that. I love that. Yeah, no, that's a really great idea. Oh, one question I forgot to ask, and then we'll bring it to a close. Is what about, and you do talk about this in the book, if like your partner, for example, has, I don't know, not great sleep, and so you get woken up and so forth. How do you deal with that?
A lot of people are doing a sleep divorce where
Yeah,
they just get separate beds. I mean, if you like your partner, I don't think it's a good idea because we know that affection, sex, oxytocin is
totally.
one of the greatest cortisol antidotes. And so if you're not getting that, your cortisol can stay high, particularly for women.
Yeah,
And so you really do want to have sex. And I just read that if a woman gets 1 hour more sleep, she's more likely to want and initiate sex the next day. So for all the guys out there, let her sleep in or
yeah,
go to bed
exactly. And it's
earlier.
also cyclical, right? Good sex that leads to better sleep. So
Oh yeah, 100%. Like it's all this oxytocin cortisol interaction. So if it's one of the best ways to get rid of stress and cortisol is to engage in sex. So what was the question you were saying?
just how like to deal with when
Oh,
you and your partner
partners.
have different kind of like maybe somebody really needs their deep sleep, somebody is needs less and wakes up and comes to bed at different times.
Yeah, I think we always try and make a rule like we try to go to bed at the same time every night,
Yes.
only because there's so many different friction points that happen
Mm.
if you don't. And I'm a night owl. I will stay up, really late if I could left to my own devices. But because my partner is up at 6, out jumping out of the bed, just cluttering around the house, I've kind of been forced into that, and it's actually been better for me. So I think if you both just make a promise to each other
Mm.
to go to sleep by 10 together,
Mm.
honestly, like, so many other things will just dissolve, like the fight over the dishwasher or the fight over the distribution of labor or the fight over money. It won't be so as catastrophic when you're not both exhausted
Mm.
and you've got a clean brain and you can see rationally, and you've had sex. So I honestly, like, if you can do anything, try to just go to bed at the same time
Yeah, love it.
together.
Yeah, cool. Okay, two quick final questions. One is I like to always leave people with one habit. So we've talked about a lot of ways to optimize your sleep. If the listeners could try just one thing this week, where would you recommend they start?
Oh, it'd have to be sleep consistency. Yeah.
Yeah.
So anchor your wake time. And even if, like, so just get up at 6 and then don't nap during the day. If you just feel awful, what you're doing is you're forcing yourself into that's going to bed at 10. So you should be getting natural sleep pressure 16 hours after the first, like, light exposure.
Yeah.
So, and get ready to get into bed at that time. So that's one thing I would do, is just anchor your wake time.
Perfect. Amazing. And then just finally, like, how do people find this book? I've got it here. Thank you so much for sending me a copy. Oh, it's not showing up. Yeah, where do
Here we go. Yeah.
There you go. You got it. Great. Yeah, it's brilliant. Mine is now got marks all through it and questions.
Oh, good.
And, where do people find you and your book and your work?
Yeah, so this book is in every bookstore. It's coming out also as an Audible. So if you just Google it, it's in Amazon and Booktopia. And typically, if people want to find me, I post most about my research and what I'm doing on LinkedIn, actually. So
Yeah.
Dr Jemma King, PhD. I've also got a website. If you just Google Dr Jemma King, and I've got lots of tidbits on all sorts of human behavior things and stress and sleep and behavior on LinkedIn.
Beautiful. Amazing. Well, thank you so much. I've really, really enjoyed this. I am going to go run the experiment this week. And
Yeah.
thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.